Hi, something a little different for this, the final Park Life episode for Season 1. Hoping a Season 2 will return later in the year. In this episode, I sit with Dave Anderson, who featured in episode 10. Only this time, we turn the tables and Dave takes the lead in having me share some of my own theme park journey to date. This seemed a fitting way to close out what was originally a passion project, born out of time in lockdown in the year that was 2020. Thanks for tuning in and the support of the podcast since its January 2021 launch. Wherever you are, keep safe and well, and I hope you enjoy the following conversation.
I'm going to start first up, Michael, with the whole of this Park Life podcast. What made you initially think about this and get into it?
Well, it was during lockdown and I realised that everyone's life is a book, as you and I have talked many times, and everyone's got a story. And I thought to myself, well, I know a lot of people that have got great stories, and a lot of these people I'm working with or have worked with, and wouldn't it be great to capture those stories and get them down and have a record of them and have that record there for their friends, for their family, and then for people who might find the theme park industry fascinating and would like to know a little bit more about its inner working. So it was a little bit of a passion project, just born out of the fact of, like all of us, having time on the hands while we were locked down. That was the motivation.
And now that you're nearing, this final episode with you in it, has it surprised you how much you've learned, or did you find out far more than you ever dreamed about?
It's interesting, mate. I found that there's common threads between all of us. There's common desires, common hopes, common insecurities, common fears that run between all of us. And it doesn't matter if you're talking to someone in a real position of influence and power in the positive sense, a lot of responsibility, or if you're talking to someone who's more directly responsible for frontline tasks. There's similar threads that run through all of us. And I found that, I don't know if I found it surprising, I found it a confirmation of what I think I already thought I might find out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the strength of each of those stories, that no matter who you are or what industry you're in, I think when people listen, they find, this is all very uniquely human, whether you're in the theme park industry or something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Now, I did say at the beginning that I met you when you were a young announcer at SeaWorld, but obviously you started in theme parks elsewhere. Tell us about your park life, the start of it, your early days, how you got into theme parks.
Yeah, it's interesting, mate. I was finishing high school in Townsville in North Queensland, and I knew that I couldn't stay there. I just knew that there wasn't going to be anything for me in that part of the country. And a couple of weeks out of high school, I made a decision to jump on a bus and head to the Gold Coast. We had some extended family that were living on the coast, and there was an opportunity for me to stay there for a while. And Trevor Long, who I guess we can talk about a little later, was sort of in the circle of the family and on my dad's side. And they kind of knew, Trevor and Wendy, his wife at the time, kind of knew that I was this teenage kid that really felt like he had to get out of Townsville. I didn't know where I could go, but I knew I had to get out of Townsville. I'd done a lot of community theatre. I'd done a lot of community radio. I used to do mid till dawn shifts from the age of 15. Mum would drop me off and pick me up, and I would record these shows and play them back on cassette, and I'd critique. I'd write slow down, stop umming and ahhing, and I didn't know it at the time, but what I was doing was kind of honing these skills that in a few years would really sort of start everything. So when I looked around Townsville, I thought there's not much here for me. And I can still remember the day I jumped on a bus and waved through the glass to Mum and Dad, 18 years old, and headed down to the Gold Coast and had an interview lined up at SeaWorld. And, it's funny, it was my first job interview. I had a poor man's beard and this terrible mullet, and I had an earring in my left ear, and I hadn't shaved, because I'm not even thinking I've got to do those things. I had no one to kind of tell me. So I turn up for this interview, and met a guy called Steve who would later have another sort of impact on my life years later. Steve Galbraith was the operations supervisor. And I was being interviewed for a holiday job December, January in ops. And that was going to be as an attractions attendant. And the interview is going along fine. He's asking me about my background, and I tell him what I've told you, a little bit of community radio, some community theatre. And he says to me, well, I think you'd be good on the train ride. We might get you started on that because you've got to announce to the guests and do a script while you drive the train. And we'll start you next week and see how you go from there. And I said, oh, well, that's terrific. Thanks. And we shook hands. I thought it was all going really well. And then his demeanour changed a little bit. And we finished shaking hands and his demeanour changed a bit. And he looked at me and said, oh, another thing. I said, yeah, don't ever come to a job interview unshaven. You're going to have to lose that mullet and you should take the earring out of your ear. And I took the earring out in real time and apologised. And I had no idea that I should have done those things before I walked in the door. I mean, that's how green I was. That was the beginning. And sure enough, through that Christmas period, I would dress up in the overalls with the scarf, and it wasn't a very flattering costume. And then I would be on the train. I had this script, and away I went. And that was the beginning.
Wow. Well, to go back further then, you say that's the beginning of theme park. I want to understand even how it ended up like that, because you said at 15 you were doing community radio. You obviously had an interest in it. Where did that come from? Your interest in being basically some kind of performer?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's interesting because Mum and Dad were both military and in the Air Force. Dad was a warrant officer disciplinary. You know, he was someone that started at the ground level and worked his way up, where he met Mum. Dad was also a semi-professional musician, played guitar and would play local pubs and clubs. Was naturally a funny guy, loved his music, loved movies. He was kind of the gateway into popular culture. So I think back, and I think that love of all things arts came through Dad, although beyond his guitar, he wasn't necessarily, well, he also drew as well. But there wasn't a lot of arts in the house because it was all very sort of military orientated. You know, we were an Air Force family. But it's interesting. I remember the very first time I picked up a microphone, I was in maybe grade 4, and there was a talent show. And all the kids had to get up and do something. Some kids got up and danced. Some kids got up and sang. I got up and did some comedy. It's like grade 4. The only memory I have was in a Catholic school. So I remember the hall was filled with these nuns and our teachers. And my teacher was Mrs. Brown. And I remember getting up on stage, no script. I just thought, I think I can wing this. In grade 4, and I got up and I impersonated the teachers and the nuns. And I was getting these big laughs. And I can still remember all the laughs landing. Probably not because the impersonations were that good, but just the fact that there's a kid in grade 4 daring to do that. And I remember during that, someone's kid that was smaller than me jumped up on the stage and interrupted me. And I improvised for the first time, though I didn't know that's what I was doing. And as the kid got picked up by his or her mum and taken off the stage, there was a beat. And I remember saying this one thing. I remember saying, they're so adorable when they're young. And I got a big laugh because I was grade 4. So it was like, they're so cute when they're young, they're so adorable. And I remember that line hit me. And that was the biggest laugh. And I remember thinking, oh, that is kind of funny because I'm a kid. And I remember afterward, the kids all coming up to me and Mrs. Brown coming up and, oh, very good, Mr. Croaker, very funny. That's the earliest memory of thinking, I think I can do this. I haven't really thought about that memory for years until you asked.
But the spark was there. That's where it, there's.
I think so. I think that's the earliest memory of grabbing a mic with no real understanding of why. But before Dad passed, we would talk, and Dad had a late brother that played guitar who was a professional musician, and I think it kind of went back in the bloodline on Dad's side to some degree.
Okay.
And it was always hard for Mum and Dad, I think, because I didn't really fit into the mould of where I think they thought I might end up. Dad would always say to me, you know, one day you'll be in the Air Force, and people will say, there goes Barry Croker's son. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, I don't know if that's going to be my main motivation. I think Dad always thought you'll follow the services because his father had been in the services.
Yep.
Mum had been in the service. It just seemed like it would make sense. But I went as far away from that as I could.
When you were at high school, without knowing you were going to the Gold Coast to start on the train at SeaWorld, did you picture a career path back then?
Yeah, it's interesting, matey. The only thing I ever wanted to do was work in the arts, and I remember sitting with a guidance counsellor, having that meeting that they would put kids through, and it was like, what do you want to do? And it was out of that meeting we talked about NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art, and he was saying to me, that's if you're serious, this is the path you should look at. And so at 17 I auditioned for NIDA, and they would take you at the time at that age. That was the youngest age they would take. And it was a 3-year course, the acting course, if you got through. And you had to prepare and do a dramatic monologue, a comedic, and a Shakespearean. And I can still remember my 3 pieces, not entirely, but I remember where they came from. And I sat down and had to put these 3 pieces together. And I ended up having my audition in the final year of high school. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this will just happen. It's just the joy of youth, right? You don't know, the world can be ugly, and it can not always be easy. So I just thought, well, I guess I'll do this. I'll get in, and away I go. And then I remember going down to Brisbane. I'd never been to Brisbane before, and it seemed so big. And going in for the audition on South Bank, and I remember that I had no idea what to expect. The place was filled with maybe 100 people in this auditorium, and everyone seemed old. They would have been 25, 30. I'm 17. But you know what it's like, everyone seems older. And all the conversations around me were people saying, oh, you're back. Oh, you're back. And people were hugging each other. You've come back again, you're trying again. And I'm just sitting there listening to all these conversations happen around me because I was on my own. And I thought, oh, everyone here is saying, you're coming back to try again. You're coming back. What do you mean try again? Don't I just come down here and do this and then away I go? I mean, I genuinely thought, I feel like I'm predestined to do this. Why are these guys coming back? And so now my confidence is starting to diminish because my awareness is opening up. So I get into the audition process. They were going to take 2 people from each state around the country into the Sydney program. So we've got 100 people auditioning in Brisbane, and 2 people are going down.
Wow. I
remember getting up, and some people wouldn't get past 3 lines before the nerves would cave them in, because there'd be these adjudicators at a big table, everyone else seated in the round. You'd be called up, stand before the table, do your 3 pieces. Some people would just stand up and break down and just apologise, and they'd be told, thank you, please move on, we'll see you next year. And I'm watching all this thinking, what is going on? I get up, I start my piece. My upper body felt like I was completely present, felt like I had this, and I was steady. But then I noticed I was getting laughs. I could hear laughter around me in my dramatic monologue. I could hear this pockets of laughter. And I'm wondering, why are they laughing? It was a dramatic piece. And I remember that it was from a play called The Father We Loved on a Beach by the Sea. It's a very heavy bit of drama. And I'm getting these pockets of laughter. And then I realised, I become aware of my body. My right knee cap is quivering. And to the point that my right leg is starting to shake noticeably, and I can't stop it. But I become aware of it. And in my mind I'm thinking, I'm done. I'm not going to get through. But I got through, but the entire time I had this nervous shake in my leg. But they let me get through. We all sat, everyone got up, did their pieces, and they got to mid-afternoon. They said, listen guys, we're going to call out some names. If you hear your name, thank you, see you next year. If you don't hear your name, stay where you are. And in my mind I'm thinking, well, my name's going to be called, I'm done. So people's names are getting called, and they would break down, and the room clears, and they get through these, 80 or 100 people. I'm in the final 4.
Wow.
I thought in my mind, this is it. This is what I've dreamt of. I'm going to Sydney to study drama in the National Institute of Dramatic Art. And we made the final four, myself and three others, obviously, and then we were told, come back tomorrow, guys. It's going to be a grueling day because we're going to take 2 out of the 4 of you, and we're going to really make you work. I bounded out of there that night. I thought, I've got this. I remember ringing Mum and Dad. I was staying with an auntie. I remember telling them, very proudly, because they were both very doubtful. You're never going to make a career out of that. No one makes careers out of that unless they're very lucky. And I remember thinking, well, isn't everything hard? It doesn't, no matter what you pick. But they were very negative about it. And I remember ringing them saying, I think I'm in. I think I got this, which is probably my undoing, because I kind of relaxed a bit. Went there the next day, and it was a grueling audition with a lot of learnings. And the short version of that day is they pulled us into a room after really working us hard privately. We all got assigned a different tutor. And I had this guy telling me, okay, now Michael, do it very slowly and very passionately. Okay, now do it very quickly, but run around the room and exhaust yourself physically, then stop and do it to me again. And it was really intense. And we get to the end of the day and got pulled into a room, and they called out these 2 names, and I wasn't in them. And this young lady next to me started crying, and I was kind of shell-shocked. And we congratulated the other 2, and I got pulled aside by this guy, and I still remember what he said to me. And he pulled me aside. He said, listen, Michael, there's something in there. You're 17. This course will break you in 6 months. It's 3 years. It'll break you in 6 months. I just know that. And I remember not really listening because all I was hearing was no. And he said to me, go out into the world. These are his exact words because I remember taking them in. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, go out into the world, fall in love, get your heart broken. He then said, taste blood on your lips. Then get back up, wipe the dirt off you, dry the blood and wipe it off your lips, and then come here and do it again. Let me see you who you are then. And I kind of thanked him, but I had no idea what he was talking about. Blood on your lips, get your heart broken, fall in love. What are you talking about? I was devastated. I've come to understand as life has gone on. I've quoted that to other people in my own way. Because I've come to understand what that story is. You need to live. You need to experience life. You need to be sad. You need to be happy. You need to be elated. You need to hurt. You need to feel joy. And all these things are your instruments for the craft. And then you can access them and draw them out for performance. But getting up here and pretending to act or pretending you know those emotions is not the craft. I didn't know any of that at the time. So that's the long version of that story. I came back to Townsville, and it was a really tough period because it was like, well, it's not that. I never even thought I should go back and try again.
Really?
No, never crossed my mind to try again. I just had this thought, okay, well, that door's done. I was a bit indignant about it. I thought, young and proud. And so it was what do you do? And I thought, well, I'm not staying in Townsville. And then it became a thing about talking to, I remember Trevor was up. He'd worked at SeaWorld and he was up and visiting the family, and I was telling him the story I've told you, and then we were talking about, well, you could always try and start afresh and maybe work your way back down to Sydney or Melbourne where it's all at. We could put you up for a little while, maybe a few months. And that was to go back full circle, that was the beginning of that. So high school ended, I jumped on a bus. I didn't really know what I was going to, but I knew what I had to move away from, which was a place where, there's nothing negative about the town, but there was nothing there for a kid like me.
Okay. So you find yourself now, let's go forward a little bit, you're on the train at SeaWorld, and you're a Christmas casual. Obviously, they didn't cut you at the end of that Christmas period. No,
they kept me on. I loved that gig. I loved being on that train because I got to talk to people. And the thing I loved the most was I got to listen to shows because the train main station was located next to a marine mammal stadium where we had the seals. And at that time there were whales, as you know, false killer whales, suit orcas, Squirt and Nina. And in between driving the train, you'd have to park the train and wait for the guests to load. Shows would be on. I'd be listening to the announcers. And I got to know each of there were three guys in the department, and I got to know their distinct voices.
Mm-hmm.
And that was planting seeds. I was like, who are these guys? I could do that. How do I do that? So the operations team kept me on, but I had my ears and my eyes by then on show and entertainment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. And how long did that take?
It would have been about 6 months. I made my intention known to operations that I'd really love to get into show and entertainment. It's funny because I've over the years been around that with other people coming in through the business around me, and so my story is fairly common in that respect. But I got myself known to the guy that ran the announcing department, and you would remember Chuck Gard.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck was a larger-than-life Canadian guy. He had this distinctive accent, and he was an imposing-looking guy. You know, as you remember too, he was a very fit guy. He rode a bike every day for miles and miles, and he was very confident on the mic, and everyone knew who Chuck was. He was the voice of SeaWorld at that time. His voice was everywhere. And eventually what happened was he'd heard about me, and I'd expressed my interest in volunteering. Is there anything I can do? Could I learn how to mix the shows? Could I maybe do some announcing? The idea of announcing for them was there's no way in hell. You know, you're too young, you haven't had much experience. We might look at you to learn some mixing. And I remember being told, Chuck may come and listen to you on the train one day and just get a sense of what you've got. I was driving the train one day, Chuck was walking through the park. You know, he'd walk through the park chewing gum, and he had this charisma about him, you know. Again, he was a real imposing character for a lot of people, this big mustache. And he's walking through the park, and I see him queuing up with the guests to get on the train one morning. And he doesn't acknowledge me, he's just focused on getting on the train. I see who it is, and again, I'm 18, I'm nervous. It's Chuck. He got on the train, so I'm about to announce for Chuck on the train. And I turn around as we're ready to leave main station. He's sitting at the back, and I think to myself, make this a really good one. So I do the best I can as I'm announcing the tour of the park on the train. He gets off the train when we park it, and I look anxiously over to him, and he just gives me a wave, nods his head, keeps walking. Doesn't come up, saying anything, just keeps walking. So I don't know, is he happy, is he unhappy? I later find out that he's happy enough that I get asked to meet with him, and they offer me the opportunity to volunteer and learn how to mix shows. So I'd work 5 days in operations, on rides, and then I'd volunteer my 2 RDOs, my days off, in show and entertainment. I'd clean the studios, and I'd learn how to mix the shows. We were mixing on tape in those days, on cartridge tape. Q-Master systems, I think it was. And I remember sitting in the canteen one day, and one of the ops guys who I'd worked with asking, why are you here on your days off? And I said, I'm volunteering with the announcers. And I remember him saying to me, well, that's free labour, you're working for nothing. They're using you. Why are you doing this for these guys? They're using you. And everything's perspectives, right, as we both know. And I said, no, I'm getting free education. Yep. All it's costing me is time. I'm getting free education. I'm learning skills I had no idea about. So for some people, it was like, why are you wasting your time? And it's a free ride for them. For me, it was like, if you can show me how to do this, I'll give you everything I got. Mm-hmm. And I was volunteering for so long and so enthusiastically that Chuck had to intervene and say, hey, listen, you know, we can't have you working 7 days anymore. You're going to burn out. We know you're there. Cool your jets, and we'll work it out with ops. So within operations, we had conversations. I was able to do about 3 days in ops, 2 days in show and entertainment. And I was eventually mixing all the shows. And then I was really hungry to become an announcer. I wanted to do that. And again, the oldest guys in that department would have been 40, maybe 35. And I would pester Chuck, can I please audition and show you what I can do on a mic? And he was always a bit dismissive. Can I keep going? You want me to keep telling you this story?
Yeah, absolutely.
So he eventually submitted this. He let me pitch to him I could do a Pirates of Paradise ski show one morning. This was the big ski show of the time. You know, 20-minute show. It had a big galleon in the final act. It had Captain Greenbeard, part man, part character suit. There was pyro. There was like 3 dance numbers, cast of 14. and jump acts and slalom skiing. It was a big show for what it was. And everyone was in costume. You were the Pirate King, and you ran that show for 20 minutes. You were the voice, and you had to keep that thing moving in front of a stadium that would sit 2,500 seated and maybe 4,000 with the wings of the grassed hills. So to jump into that show was a really big deal, but I felt like I could do it. Eventually I went away and I learnt the script. I would record the shows. I would watch and listen to Chuck and the other two guys, Warren and Tony, and I'd listen to their styles, and then I thought, I think I can bring my own thing to this. And to Chuck's credit, he one morning put together a show audition for me. It was like 8:30 in the morning, and I barely knew the skiers. And I can still remember that day of getting down onto the dock, and everyone's annoyed because they've all been called in to do a third show, because normally it's 2 shows a day, 12:30 and 4, but now they've got a third show, and it's in full dress, full pyro, everything, with no audience. And I remember going down there, and I'm anxious. I'm introducing myself to the guys, and no one's really interested. And I can hear them talking. What's this for again? Oh, it's this guy here. He's having a go at the show or something. That's the guy mixing the shows? Yeah. Oh, all right. There was nothing, you know. But I persevered. We got down on stage. I did the show to an audience of 1. Chuck watched it from the grassy hill. The cleaners were starting the day. Stadium's empty. We get through the show, and the skiers all run off and exit. No one can get away quick enough. I'm kind of left on the stage walking back to the dock where the skiers are on my own, and Chuck calls out to me, and I turn and he waves me over. And up until this point he'd been fairly distant from me, you know, just the authoritarian character. And I never forgot it, because as I'm walking toward him, I don't know if it's gone well or not. I figure I got through it. As I walk toward him, he puts his arm around me and turns me around to walk with him into the park. And he says, "All right, guy, come and walk with the king." And he talked and walked and offered me a job. And I still remember that line, you know, "Come and walk with the king." It was such a great Chuck line, because in one breath he's letting you know, I'm the guy. And in the next breath he's also letting you know with that line, but I accept you.
Yep.
Come and walk with the king. And away I went. I was the youngest live show announcer in the history of the park. And it was that was the beginning of everything.
Okay. Now we are obviously, you always ask these questions, and because we're touching on it, we're going to go to it now. To talk about mentors.
Yeah.
You've talked about Steve and Trevor, and I know Steve's going to come up again a bit later too, but Chuck was obviously a major mentor in your life.
Yeah.
What were some others? Or who was the most? Let's start there.
Look, I think Trevor Long, who was the face and the voice of SeaWorld, particularly from a marine science perspective for decades, was that first mentor. Trevor was a self-made guy who started work at SeaWorld as a diver. And he had a lot of passion about him. He was kind of uncompromising in his own way as well. But he was a bit of a frontiersman, you know, and under Trevor's vision, things like Shark Bay were created, and he had such a great love of the ocean and the animals. It was kind of inspiring, and I would love being around him telling stories. Trevor was filled with these great stories and loved the animals and loved that park. And that kind of was motivating for me, you know, and meeting Chuck was a really big deal, because I'd watched him from a distance, and what I loved about his style on stage was it was big and it was all personality. And then you would dig into Chuck's story. You know, he was self-made. He had no formal training, but he had his wits, came to Australia from Canada with his wits, was working as a removalist, saw a job going, thought, I've got a big personality, I'm sure I can handle a microphone. And I got to know this later. Again, everyone's a story, right?
Yeah.
But he had great theories on leadership. I remember he sat me down once and he said to me, in his own way, he goes, "Mike, at the moment, I'm number 1." This is how he would talk, right? I'm the best here. But here's what I want. I want you to be the best. And then if you're the best and I move to number 2, together, our team is great. You know, I'm a kid, 18. I would eat this stuff up, because he would fill me with these thoughts, you know, that I want you to take me out because then we are going to be great. So I was getting all these little lessons about, leadership and leading from behind, and I don't know I'm getting those lessons at the time.
Yeah.
But he was that guy. I didn't have my parents around me, obviously, and it could be a bit lonely in terms of having adult influence around me. So I would go to him with the questions you have when you're 18 about things and starting your life. And so he would also, well, you want to do this. You don't want to put your money there. Make sure you do this. You need to buy yourself a car. If you're buying a car, you make sure you ask. I mean, all these little things, right? Yeah. That just came with it. But I remember him also saying, when I eventually moved into a supervisory role, I remember him saying to me, always make decisions, Mike. Even if they're the wrong ones, always be seen to be making decisions. Don't second guess yourself for too long. People are looking to you to lead. You have to be decisive. You have to measure up your options. You have to make decisions. But I remember hearing that when I was like, in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. So all these little nuggets. Trevor came along at the right point in my life, and then Chuck very quickly came along at the right point. And sometimes you're getting those people coming along at those points in your life. If you're paying attention, you'll recognise them for what they are. You'll recognise, this is a coach. This is a teacher. Often we don't know we're getting the lesson until we're reflecting on it. I'd like to think I kind of knew at the time. I was very aware that these people are the right people at the right time. I can learn. Yeah. I was always hungry to learn.
Yeah. And spending so much time with them, you had that awareness of it being lessons. It wasn't just the guy you bumped into at the coffee shop every weekend. No. This was a hands-on time a lot. So the dawning of that, the importance of the lessons and the coaching, would have come through for you for sure. You mentioned there when you were supervising, so you did rise up, become a supervisor at SeaWorld. You were the head supervisor of the announcers?
That's right, yeah.
And where did it go from there?
Yeah, well, that was, Chuck had moved up. His career moved on. He became entertainment manager. I eventually moved into the role of supervisor. And that was, that had its own challenges and learnings as well. But, from an announcing perspective, I was really honing that craft. I had not only Chuck's way, but I had Warren, who was one of the announcers. Chuck was big on personality. Warren was big on discipline and detail. So, had the least amount of words to say the most. And get to your point. And avoid your vocal interference, your ums and your ahs. And he was a disciplined announcer. Tony was all about warmth and was casual. So what he maybe didn't have in that discipline, he had bucket loads of warmth. So I remember picking from each of them those strengths and then making it my own, taking some of the leadership lessons I took from Chuck and bringing that into leadership. So it was a bit of a load and a bit overwhelming at times, but eventually what happened, it gave me the opportunity to create and allow other parts of me to have time to do things. So I guess the turning point that next came was I conceived what eventually became the Quest for the Golden Seal as a seal production. And that kind of started an energy. No one was asking for a new seal production or a seal presentation because we had one that we'd had for a very long time. But I remember talking to the team we had, and we would all talk about, wouldn't it be great if the story still had all the elements of the animal behavioural content, but you wrapped it up now in a narrative that had a beginning, middle and end, and had stakes and character. And obviously the world's in a different place now, but in that time, that seemed like a good idea. So I love the idea of dipping into Raiders of the Lost Ark, trying to take elements out of that trilogy at the time and do something. So I sat on a typewriter and I wrote the first draft of what became Quest for the Golden Seal, and I'd take it back to the team that we had and we'd share ideas. I'd go back, I'd rewrite another one, and then I got that in front of Chuck. I said, hey, look, we've all been talking and I've put together a draft script with these ideas and I think there's something in it. And at first it was like, yeah, but we don't need a new SEAL show. So I know you don't need one, but wouldn't it be great if? And I didn't know it at the time, but I think what was happening was I was seeing a pattern in me of, in the absence of opportunity, create opportunity. but I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know that was a thing, you know. And I just believed there's an opportunity here to do something. We've got all the right people. We've got the skills. We could do more. And to Chuck's credit, he eventually got a draft that he liked, and he put that in front of John Menzies. John was the CEO at the time, and you know, John was unlike any other character in the history of the industry. You know, he was a trailblazer, and Chuck came back to me one afternoon and said, "Hey, I've given your script to John. He'd like to meet you and have a chat about it." And that idea to me, it blew my mind. I mean, meet John? So I'd walk the park and I'd see John from a distance, you know, and we all knew who John was. He was someone to admire, but he was also the guy that would go on to be the visionary behind Australian Outback Spectacular, Warner Brothers Movie World. Yeah. He was a visionary in the truest sense of the word. And we knew that. So John asked to meet me, and I went upstairs, and I remember Chuck telling me, you know, don't be nervous, just go in and show him your script. He's read it. He wants you now to explain some things to him. I was so nervous. And I went up, you know, I'm still a kid, and I could handle Chuck because I knew Chuck. I could connect with Chuck, and that exchange was fairly easy. I was no longer nervous around Chuck, but the idea of going to John that young. So I walked upstairs to the boardroom, and he had this big office, and he was sitting at his computer, and I walked in really nervous, and he could sense that, I think, and was trying to sort of calm me down. And you know, he was very much, "Oh, how are you, old son?" I'm good, John. "I read your script. Take a seat." I took a seat, and I remember as I sat on the seat, it had that spongy kind of, if you lean back, they rest back really quick, and it kind of snapped back. And I thought I was going to fall, so I slapped the top of the board table, and I had to adjust myself because I thought the chair was going to spit me out. And he looked at me, and I made this big sound as my hand slapped on the desk. He looked at me and he said, "You all right?" I said, "No, I'm good. I'm sorry, John." And I could feel the sweat at the back of my neck. And I got this typewritten script in my hand, and he's got his photocopied version in front of him. And he says, "All right, I've looked at this. You know, the quest for the golden seal, right?" I said, "Yeah, okay, all right. Well, read it through to me." And I did. Nervously, I read him the script, and then he would stop me. "Well, what's going on here, though? Why is that happening at that point?" "Oh, well," and sometimes I could answer, sometimes I couldn't. And he was giving me some teachings, you know. "Well, have a think about what's driving that decision, because I don't understand how we got from there to there like that."
Yeah.
"Okay." And I'd take my notes, and he'd send me on my way. And I remember he sent me on my way on that first meeting, and he had all my notes, and he liked it, but it wasn't cooked. So he said, "Look, go away, keep working on it. You've got something in there, but it needs work. All right?" Okay. Away I went. I think maybe 3 or 4 times, and each time those meetings with him got easier. And again, a great mentor. He was collaborating with me. I was a kid. I was a frontline supervisor. He was the chief executive officer. He doesn't have to spend an hour with me giving me tips on how to build narrative. He doesn't have to do that. There are other people around that will do that for you, who don't need to be coached. But he did it for me. He didn't know me. What I think he saw in hindsight was, well, here's a kid that's knocked on the door and said, "I can do this." And he's got something. So that was kind of the next thing. And again, the short version of that story, the show eventually was welcomed and budgeted for, and kind of got out of my hands and went bigger than I could manage. And the show was given a birth, and it ran for a decade. That changed everything for me then, just in terms of the perception that I might have had from people higher than I.
Okay. But then your work life took a bit of a turn a bit after that, heading to Sydney, is that right?
Yeah, it was interesting. Steve Galbraith, who had interviewed me and told me to lose the mullet years earlier, had become operations manager for a while at SeaWorld. And so he'd moved up from operations supervisor, and he'd accepted the role of CEO at Wonderland Sydney. At the time, it was Australia's Wonderland. And that was the biggest theme park in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. We all knew of it. None of us had been there, but we all knew, as big as we were, and Movie World by that time was on the scene, so as big as we were becoming as a group, Wonderland was bigger again in terms of a park footprint. So Steve took this role on as CEO, and then he did something that was a bit tough on the SeaWorld park for a little while, but great for us as young leaders, because he took, or at least offered me, a role as entertainment manager, and then offered key people within the business senior leadership roles to the next level out of SeaWorld into Sydney. And we'd all taken them. So there was a bit of an exodus down to Sydney. And we're all young and excited and new opportunities. And that was 1999, and I remember saying goodbye to Chuck and shaking his hand and walking out of there and wondering, is this the right thing? Because I'd been managing a team of 4, and now it was going to be a team of about 40. Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about leadership on that last time we were together, and I went down there, and that was where I did a lot of my learning. You know, I realized all the things I didn't know, but I also I grew. There was quite a few of us down there from SeaWorld. For a little while, the team that we were moving in with quietly referred to, as we found out later, as the SeaWorld Mafia, because for that team had been together, some of them for over a decade. It's like, well, who are these people? What are they about? And we did go in there and put the park through a period of reinvention. And this was the great thing with Steve. He basically said, in his own way, you know, the park's an open canvas. I want you to think outside the box and see what the park could be. At that point, we were handling Hanna-Barbera characters, Yogi Bear, Fred Flintstone at the time, and had costume character shows on with those characters. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, as you know, I grew up as a Marvel Comics kid, and Marvel wasn't anywhere in this part of the world. The Tobey Maguire film from Sam Raimi was about 3 years away. It's being talked about. And by now we're in maybe early 2000. I'd have to go back and look at the dates, but I remember thinking to myself, is there any reason we couldn't have Marvel here and really, you know, bring the park into the now? I knew that Marvel had been at Islands of Adventure at the time at Universal in the States, but they weren't in this region. So I remember pitching that in a manager's meeting one morning, and again, I'm like 31 maybe, and pitched in a PowerPoint this idea of bringing Marvel Comics into the park, and, you know, talked about the Avengers and talked about these characters. And these characters are still years away from breaking into the cinematic consciousness, you know. But I knew they were in parks, and that was starting in the States. And I remember pitching Spider-Man. Had this idea of a themed ride and then a live action stunt show, and, you know, large scale, and got through the presentation. And Steve at the end of the table, God bless him, at the end of the table, looks at me and says, well, that's all good, but who the hell is Spider-Man? He didn't know. No one knew what I was talking about. Right. So the short version of that story is eventually Dustin, who was the marketing manager there, he and I were kind of like a double-edged sword in terms of entertainment and marketing and positioning. And he got it. And he was very brand aware, and he had that discipline from a marketing perspective. And we had this opportunity. And again, the short version of this, within 12 months, we found ourselves in New York and LA. And on that trip, we successfully brokered a relationship with DreamWorks. And we were the first theme park in this part of the world to bring in Shrek and Donkey. Yep. This is on the first film. And we brokered that deal in the States, and we had a schedule of the people we were going to meet up with, and we had pitch documents ready. Because once we thought Marvel, it's like, well, hang on, why aren't we talking to... Mm-hmm. And that included MGM. We sat in the offices of MGM, and we pitched naming rights for Wonderland Sydney, the MGM Wonderland Sydney, and had this concept of a boardwalk out the front of the park that we were going to call Sunset Strip. Yep. And there'd be cinemas and burger joints. And so we're sitting in their offices, and we pitched, 2 young guys, you know, just running on adrenaline, and wouldn't it be nice if, you know, a lot of our presentations were done with hand-drawn art, conceptual art, that I'd taken over on card and was pulling out to present. You know, really old school. And The MGM one didn't fire for a bunch of different reasons. DreamWorks came on board. We met with the Henson Company. I can still remember, who was the guy that played in Rocky Horror Picture Show? Frankenfurter.
Oh,
Name escapes me.
Tim. I was going to say Tim Roth. It's not Tim
No,
Roth.
come on.
Tim,
There'll be people listening saying,
Tim
come
Curry.
on. Tim Curry. I remember we got to the Henson offices, and as we were walking in doing the tour, we walked past Tim Curry, who's having coffee with a friend out front of what was Jim Henson's office. So they're taking us on this tour. I still remember thinking, wow, I'm sure that's Tim Curry. Wow. We walk into this office, and the office had been left in state since Jim had passed. So this beautiful big leather chair in the corner, this big table,
Wow.
photos on the wall, life-size Fozzie Bears and Kermits in the corner, and a big black and white photo on the wall of Charlie Chaplin, maybe in his 30s, with a pickaxe in his hand. And I remember them explaining that's Charlie Chaplin with the pickaxe on the day he broke Earth on the office lot that we're standing in now.
Wow.
So Jim Henson's office was Charlie Chaplin's old office.
Yep.
So you had to pinch yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and we were there talking about bringing the Muppets into Wonderland. Again, we were aiming a little beyond our reach. We couldn't quite make that happen. But we were successful in having these experiences was enough, you know. Then we met with the Marvel team in New York. And even then, I remember we walked in and it was, again, pitching on card. And we had this first Spider-Man ride that it was in pencil drawing, you know, beautifully done by an artist. And I'm pitching that, and Dustin's talking about, you know, the brand and how we can collaborate together and integrate the Marvel brand into the Wonderland Sydney fabric. And then here's how we would do this and do that. And he's listening away, and the guy in charge of licensing in this big office, you know. And then we talked about, you know, what the Spider-Man show would be. Because I'd been a fan, I could talk about it. I knew the lore, you know. I knew those character stories, and so I could talk at some depth. And I can still remember the guy telling us how excited they were that it just announced internally that a guy called Tobey Maguire was going to be Spider-Man. That's not official yet, but he's a young guy, he's got a lot of talent. We're really excited that when that film comes, we've got high hopes. We got that deal.
Wow.
That's the short version of that story.
Yeah.
I remember a moment when we had on the Wonderland Sydney entrance, we had the Wonderland Sydney, we went through a rebranding. And Australia's Wonderland became Wonderland Sydney. And on the logo signage out the front entry, we had the Hulk and Spider-Man featured with the Wonderland brand. I can still remember that day when that appeared, and that was a real moment.
Yeah.
You know, and then suddenly, Spider-Man was in the park.
What about your comparisons here? Let's go back to John with Quest for the Golden Seal.
Yeah.
Gets across the line.
Yeah.
You're in New York with Dustin.
Yeah.
At what stage does the adrenaline hit there? When they're shaking your hand, or when you're signing the paper? When do you go, got it?
Yeah.
Pitch something, got it.
It's funny, I never stopped to think about that. You know, we were in New York only the same year of 9/11. So it was November. I remember it was a really odd energy in that city. I'd never been there before. I'd say the only energy that I'd known, but I remember people were fairly subdued. We went out to dinner, and I remember we went out with the DreamWorks people, and everyone was obviously still in shock, but still talking about 9/11. There was never time to think about what you've done. You know, I was always a little bit overawed by some of it, you know, but I never really, I think this industry and these businesses move so quick. It's only now that you sit and talk about it and reflect and you pull these stories up. But I never really took the time to sit in it and reflect and go, hey, look at that. And in some respects, I'm glad, because I think the second you start, I think it was Clint Eastwood that once said, I always took my work seriously. I never took me seriously. And I remember hearing that line and thought, oh, what a beautiful way to put it. For me, that meant take the work seriously, do the work, but don't you get caught up in you.
Yeah.
You just do the thing you love.
Yeah.
And but sometimes you do have to sit back and look at it and go, oh, look what we did, because it's always a group of people. And the thing I'm grateful for with all of that is people like Steve, who says, sure, we'll go try that.
Yeah.
People like John saying, sure, try that, but less of this and maybe more of that, see what happens. Chuck, not bad. And then come walk with the king.
Yeah.
You know, so there are these people along the way that give you a shot. And on some occasions, they don't have to. You know, there's shortcuts to some of these things.
Obviously, those three men who, you know, highly respected men in the industry and what they did, obviously all three of them saw the same thing in you.
Yeah, I think so, in their own way. Yeah, yeah.
So that's a credit to you.
Yeah, I'm forever grateful.
We could, now I know we do have time constraints, and I could go on a lot, but now we've got to go, okay, we've done a little bit of a circle here, and you find yourself back with Village Roadshow.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was a full circle. Wonderland was going into closure, and I had moved on.
Well, how did that happen? It was bigger than these parks.
Yeah.
What happened there?
That's a long one. I mean, I think that was where my education was about really big business. We were kind of running around, myself, Dustin, and the team of leaders that we were at that time. We were a very good sort of cohort. You know, we worked really hard and tirelessly together. We're all young, we're all enthusiastic, we're all very idealistic. The owners, who were based in Kuala Lumpur at the time, ultimately saw, and we think in hindsight saw for the longest time before we knew, that the future of this park will be a land sale.
Okay.
I think from memory it was a $57 million offshore land sale at the time. I kind of couldn't read those signals from a business sense until it was maybe too late. You know, investment back into the park was kind of drying up, and we weren't able to advance these ideas we were getting. And you would ask questions, you know, hey, are we still moving here? And yeah, we're just going through a cloud, and we'll be fine. And then ultimately the word came down, actually, guys, we're going to sell the business. And it's no longer going to be a theme park, it's a land sale. That's the short version of what's a fairly long story. But getting to that point for me was growing up. And that idealistic kid who was still living in me through all of that, you know, who was still pinching himself when he walked out of the Marvel offices. And that idealistic kid grew up and realised that, you know, there's often bigger forces than you would think that are going on. And that's the thing about my journey too, is that I had to learn as I've gone that it's one thing to be a creator, and it's one thing to have that part of your brain going where you can, you know, paint, write, create, and perform and all those things. But you very much need to, and I had to learn that very quickly, you very much have to be able to also move into that other part of your mind and be business orientated. You know, what are the numbers doing? What's the commercial aspects of these decisions you're making creatively? Because the creative and the commercial are intertwined. They're not independent. And it can't be art for art's sake. And there's got to be a commercial element and awareness there. And you must be able to talk that language as well to the people that aren't necessarily equipped to talk your creative language. Then having said that, when you leave that room, you better be able to talk the creative language with co-creators who you're moving with at another level of the machine, who are there to purely create. So that experience at Wonderland was where I had to learn those things, because up until that point had been largely creating for the love of creating, you know. But so when that park was going into closure, the time was right and for me to move on, and I didn't know what I might do next, and I started my own entertainment business in Sydney and got my agent. My dream from being a kid to work as an actor, even as a struggling actor in Sydney, kind of came true through that period. I went and studied drama, and out of that was picked up by a local agent, and had some really lovely moments there for almost 2 years. I can still remember sitting at a Starbucks on George Street, having a coffee, feeling completely happy. Had a newborn baby, had no aspirations, had no opportunities in front of me for work, except the gigs I got as an actor. So I just had this period where I was just thought, I'm going to stick my toe in the water and just see where this goes. I had 2 castings that day with no promise of a job. But I remember being so happy that afternoon that I'm sitting in Sydney, I've got 2 castings to do today. That's enough.
Yep.
It's not about anything bigger than that. I dreamt of being a working actor in one of those big cities. I'm a working, struggling actor in one of those big cities.
Yep.
Not to any great fame or fortune, but I was doing it, you know. And I scored a very small speaking role on Home and Away within the first couple of months. And that rolled into being on a shortlist for a role in Godzilla Final Wars, which was going to be the last Godzilla film out of the Japanese studio that had been producing those films for years, and successfully got that role. It was edited up nicely in the final cut, but you know, I was getting the gigs, and some voiceover work, and a little bit of momentum. Nothing that was off the charts, but enough that there was some work happening, you know, and a really good agent. And in that climate, got a call from the coast, and it was, of all people, it was John Menzies asking would I be interested in flying up and having an interview and maybe think about an opportunity to come back into the parks. And that's kind of what happened.
What capacity were you coming in?
I came in and had a couple of interviews, final group interview, and then was offered the role of, at that time, creative director for Village Roadshow Theme Parks. That essentially is what it is today, which is head of entertainment. So that was a great full circle, but it was like coming home. And, you know, walking through SeaWorld and then working with John, one of the first things we did was, it's funny how things work, one of the first things we had to do creatively was redo a new seal show. And the current seal show was Quest for the Golden Seal.
Wow. Okay.
And it had been running all that time, you know, and years had gone by. And John said, you know, it's time we redid this show. So he and I collaborated on the show. It was just a funny full circle way to kick off again another chapter, that here I was with the guy that I was nervously walking up to see with my typewritten paper a decade or more before, whatever it was. Maybe not so long. Yeah,
walking back.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, it's a twofold question. Were there any, or what changes were you aware of? Not only in the park, the colour of the curtains or whatever, and with you and how you walked in compared to the person you were?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was transformed by the Wonderland experience. That was the maturity, the growing up, and becoming aware not only just of what it really meant to be an effective leader, but what it really meant to be the best possible human being you could be. You know, sometimes you're getting those lessons, you don't know you're getting them as you go. But it was a real growing period. Having that time away from the parks for a little while was a great period for reflection and getting back to who I was, understanding who I was at my core and what I was about. So when I came back, I felt like I felt more complete than I had when I first walked into Wonderland. You know, I felt like the timing was perfect. I kind of knew who I was and knew what I was about, and genuinely did. You know, and then the day that I walked through SeaWorld, all those smells were still there. They're still there, as you know, to this day. As you pass certain parts of the park, all your sensory memory comes back. Conversations you had there, the person you would see there. Still walking through that stadium, by the main ski lake. The ghosts are all still there. The kid is still there walking around anxiously. It felt like coming home. And then when John and I were working on Quest for the Golden Seal, what ended up becoming Fish Detectives, it was funny because he had asked me, think about this show, and the first thing that hit me at that time in the culture, it was Sin City. Remember that film?
Yep.
And it was a dark sort of based on the graphic novel, I think, and the film noir and very heavy. So I originally came up with something called Seal City. That was the working title. And Trevor was there still, right? And then Trevor's giving me the brief. Creatively, you need to include a message that has an environmental theme that we tie into the dialogue and the story. And that's a must-have. It's imperative, that's in the fabric of what we do. So I understand. So this idea hit me of overfishing was a real big issue, being spoken about at the time, more than maybe it is today. So this idea then came to me about, there's an overfishing scenario that's happening in this wharf, this corner of town, Seal City. Every city's got a story. Seal City, and in Seal City, this is just one of them. And then that rolled into need a villain. And I started thinking of the Untouchables then, with Kevin Costner, De Niro as Al Capone.
Yeah.
And then it hit me, Big Al Baloney. Al Baloney. Do you see what I've done there? It's a little dad humor maybe. I play with that. There's a villain, Big Al Baloney. There's the good guys. Big Al Baloney's running a cannery where he's got a brand called A Lot of Baloney. I've got to remember, these are jokes for kids, right? A lot of baloney. And he's overfishing. How is he doing it? Well, then the SEALs come in, SEAL squad comes in to solve the mystery and convey a message to Big Al about the dangers of what he's up to. And he converts and realizes the error of his ways. Well, I only get as far as this pitch to John. I go up and see him, and it's a great way to work in that time, it's very informal. And I said, you got a minute, John? Yeah, sure. I'm thinking this. And I literally tell him what I'm telling you. There's an overfishing thing happening, and there's a villain. His name's Big Al Baloney. And with that, John starts to laugh. He starts to giggle. Big Al Baloney, all right. And it's like the Untouchables. He stops me. Yeah, all right, I get it. All right, yeah, get started. And off I went. I mean, I remember him laughing and just stopping me, like, you don't need to go on about it. That's enough.
Yep.
I can do the rest in my head.
Yep.
Get started. And we did go back and forth then together, but the genesis of that idea was enough for him to go, yeah, I know now what that's going to be for that audience. Play, create. So I remember submitting the final draft of the script to him for review, and I can still remember the day he called me. And he said, I remember where I was. I was sitting in SeaWorld reception, my mobile rang. And he said, hey, I've just gone through your script for this thing you're calling Seal City. I said, yeah, not bad. Gave me some notes about story, and they were reasonable. And he said, look, I want to change the name. I said, really? He goes, well, why are you calling it Seal City? So I tell him what I've told you. Well, Sin City, it's in the culture. And I'm kind of waffling on and justifying that. And he says, no, Michael, you're aiming too high above your audience. It's fish detectives. And I remember saying, what, fish detectives? He goes, yeah. They're fish detectives. The SEAL squad are there to be detectives and solve this crime. That's all about fish and overfishing. They're fish detectives. Kids will take that. They'll understand. They're not going to have to think about it. They've got to think about SEAL City. A great little lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah.
And I remember laughing. I said, the fact that here we are having this chat together. I said, John, you're right. I get it.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm aiming higher than the audience. It became fish detectives. It was just a wonderful way to work. There's a guy that's got all this responsibility over all these sites with 1,000 things to do in an hour, but still takes time out to call me and say, hey, I think there's a better way to call this thing you're doing.
Yeah.
That was the thing about John that made him unique, is that his mind was constantly connected to what best served the parks.
Okay.
Constantly.
Okay.
And you would learn.
Yeah.
And we go, that was a lesson for me. Don't aim above the audience. Don't get too clever. Don't take yourself too seriously.
And now here we are, like, it's the 30th birthday of Movie World. It's a massive event that I can't fathom how you did it. Hats off to you and the team. You find yourself here doing phenomenal things like this, and you've got more to come. I know Fright Nights are coming, and you're always a year ahead of yourself anyway. How do you focus with so much? Do you have sections of it you go, I can't think about that now, I've got to think about that? Do you prioritise? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, look, you said it a minute ago, congratulations to you and the team, because it's exactly that. It's the right people in the right places around you all the time. And again, that lesson of sometimes you have to lead from behind. And sometimes it's not about being up front and calling it out, but sometimes it's about getting to the side, getting at the back. And I think we're all works in progress, right? So still learning how to do that. So we're kind of a collective, a little boutique collective creative unit here now across all these sites. And I think how we manage to do it is by, as much as we have to be planners, be present, be in the moment. What's happening in the moment? And a lot of these things keep coming back. I've said it many times to our co-creators who are writing and putting content together for all of those events. Keep it simple. Keep some of this stuff that we're doing short, fast, and fun. Don't get too heavy in detail. I find myself giving notes that were given to me.
Fish detectives.
Keep
it simple. Make sure they understand it.
Yeah, let the audience. I heard something many years ago. I collaborated for a little while with someone who was a very wise soul, an external partner outside the industry that had quite a career. And I remember him saying something which I've adopted because I think it's absolutely true. He said, our job is to keep people in their bodies. Keep them in their bodies having an emotional connection and experience. That's our job. Don't let them go to their heads and ask big questions. Because once they're in their heads, it's game over. And I thought, he's absolutely right. That's the same when you're watching a film or whatever it might be. We both know that feeling, right? You're sitting in the cinema and suddenly a character makes a decision or the narrative goes in a certain direction and you find yourself sitting there asking questions. Hang on, what? Well, how did we get... I don't understand why he... Now, the second you start doing that, all the art that's happening in front of you starts to come undone because you're kind of seeing the magician being too smart for his or her own good. So I still remember that line, and I've used it here many times. I told him I was going to take it off him because I said, that's a beautiful way to put it. Our job is to keep people in their bodies feeling something. And when they leave, let them go to their heads and think about it and ask questions about it. But while they're here, keep them in their bodies, keep them feeling. That's the beautiful thing about this business. We get to do that. If it's not done with a carnival, if it's not done with a Fright Nights, if it's not a Hooray for Hollywood, it's all the same formula in terms of what's the driving goal? Keep people in their bodies feeling. Because humans are drawn to that. They desire that. They love that. Even if it's unconscious. Everybody wants to feel something.
It's funny, at the beginning you talk about stories and everyone has a book and a story and everybody has a fascinating story. This one is a fascinating story. And talking about enjoying the train ride, Chuck sitting on the train, walking with the king. After that, the skiers were upset about that show, and then pitching to Marvel in New York, and now being here and doing this, and having a cup of coffee in Sydney with 2 castings coming up, but feeling bliss. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say to you, what was the highlight so far? Yeah,
there's been a lot. I've been really spoiled. I think a lot of us know that here in this business. We know we've been spoiled with many, many moments, but I can tell you the simplest thing that gave me the greatest amount of meaning was from someone I've never met, and it was from a guest. I may have told or echoed this story in some other podcast episodes, and I kind of don't mind the fact that I tend to repeat it because I think it's the most powerful, potent thing I've ever experienced in this business. And that was the story of a lady who, with her family, had saved for over a year, as she wrote in an email that I received here at the park, to come and visit the park out of New South Wales for what she knew would be the last family holiday with her little girl, because she was terminally ill. And she was coming in with her 2 children, a young boy and a terminally ill daughter. And I sat in my office, being busy, and stopped to read this email that had come through from our guest services office. And it was, feedback for our division, so I'm reading it. And in great, beautiful detail, she told the story of arriving to the park and getting in and going down Main Street at Movie World. And it was very quiet, and she and her husband felt like they were the first family through. And the first thing they see when they get on Main Street is Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, Tweety, and Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, and Tweety standing out front of the photo lab. And she describes how she said to her husband, "Quick, let's get down there. We'll get a photo. It's not too busy. We'll get a quick photo." So they get down there, and she described how her little girl's in constant discomfort. So they've never seen her smile. She's always uncomfortable, and she's always in some mild form of distress, always uncomfortable. So she describes how they get close for the photo, and she's got her son there at her side, and Dad's setting up to get the shot. And Sylvester that day gestures to Mum. He sees what's happening, sees them walking toward him, gestures to Mum with cradling arms. "I'll cradle you, little one," for the photo. And she's writing this in the email, and she gently hands her daughter over and thinks should I or shouldn't I, but she decides I will. She gently hands the daughter over and gets in close by Sylvester. And as they go to get the photo, she describes beautifully how her little daughter went limp in Sylvester's arms and dropped her head back and pulled back this big smile, and they took the photo. And she wrote how we've got that photo forever. Long after we lose our daughter, we've got that moment in time captured because of what you guys do. Mm. Please thank Sylvester from us. And it floored me. Mm. And it was the first genuine realisation of this is what we do. And I remember taking that email in and reading it to our team, and everybody was affected by it. I found our Sylvester of the day, and we had a good chat as well, and it was a beautiful, beautiful reminder of the power of this business. Mm. We've done some very big things and some very large-scale events and big evenings and lots of moving parts and 6 months in pre-production, sometimes 12 months in pre-production. We're always in pre-production, in a run or a post-production period all year round, on top of day trade across all the sites, with a very small group of people. And so we get to do some really big things where you can clearly see the fruits of your labour. Well, there's 12 months of work right there, and it's terrific. Yeah. And all that stuff is terrific. But for me, that moment still resonates years later as the core. It's at the core of every single thing we do, that direct human experience that someone has that they didn't expect, and they're feeling something.
What a beautiful story it is too, though. And I think it also makes you aware of that beautiful story and how much it meant to that family, meant everything to that family. And she took the time out to let you know and thank you. But I think it makes you also aware how it happens on a daily basis. Not everybody's taking that time, but that is a place of wonder out there for kids and for families and everybody who has different issues here and there come here to escape it all. And that's a wonderful thing.
You hit it on the head. I mean, you know this from your own experience of being the life you've had in the business yourself. That is happening, to your point. It's happening every day. It's happening every day. It's probably happening multiple times a day. And you may occasionally get told about it. But that's the power of this business. And when it's all said and done, it's the only thing that matters, is that direct human experience.
Kind of makes my final question difficult, and I'll have to probably rephrase it. Is that what gets you up each day and brings you back here, or is there even more?
Yeah, I think it's that, and I think it's the fact that no 2 days, and people say this a lot, I know, but no 2 days are alike. They're completely unique. And, you know, you can be in a meeting where you're having a conversation about the colour palette on a fabric that's going to be on a pair of trousers or a jacket in a micro dance show. And that could take a little while, and there's several people in the room with different thoughts about that. And then you'll move into an executive-based meeting that is more about budgets and planning into the next several years around certain events. And you're talking with the heads of marketing and the analytics team and the CEO and the COO and everything in between. That's the exciting thing about it. You know, you don't know from any given day. You kind of know where you're going to be through your planning, but you need to be ready in any moment, on any day, to move into any one of those layers of the business and be effective. So that's never dull. And then if you get to do it with people that share common values, even better. And we're blessed right now within this business. That's, I think, our greatest superpower, is a sharing of, through many layers of the business, common values and an awareness of who we are, what we're about, and how we're going to go about doing it. And the current event, particularly for Warner Brothers Movie World, is a great example of that. How everything has sort of come together and been delivered. You know, that's not one person. That's multiple people, multiple stakeholders sharing common vision. And then when you walk the park and you see guests immersed in it and enjoying it, that's where the reward is. You know, you walk the street.
Yep. Well, fascinating stuff, Michael. Just for those people listening, I'm sitting in Michael's office. For those that have been here or seen it, it is an office surrounded by movies, music, entertainment, magazines, comics, pop culture, happiness and joy, and you're surrounded by it. So I understand as well that this is definitely a place of creativity. On behalf of everybody who's known you and worked with you, I just want to say thank you for getting on a bus in Townsville and going down to the Gold Coast and becoming the train driver, because Chuck getting off that train and waving to you, I don't know, maybe he saw in you a great path, and you've certainly been on one. It's been fascinating for me to watch, pleasurable, and yeah, congratulations on a phenomenal career so far, and I'm certain you've got even more great things to come.
Great talking with you, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
Cheers, buddy. Well, that concludes episode 20 of season 1 of the Park Life podcast. Thanks again for taking the time to share the stories. Hopefully back later in the year with more episodes. In the meantime, you'll find me on Instagram at Mike_Croaker. Keep safe and well wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you next time.